am here to talk about the game of Dialect that we played at Rimini at IndieCON. And it actually was just about the first third of a game of Dialect. There are three phases, and this was just the first phase. Took us quite a while. It's a game that, has a substantial buy-in, and I suggest it's probably not played in a single sit-down. Well, here we have a game that's very much in the tradition of Spiona, Carrie, Steal Away Jordan, Grey Ranks. It is less directly historical than they are in its immediate draw or attraction. It doesn't say, hey, we're going to play in this and that situation that comes from this historical era. It might as well, however. Instead, it's quite clever in focusing on one particular subcultural detail and saying, oh, the game is about that. So the kind of structural fascination people may have for that draws them in and gets them going. And they don't really realize that they are playing a game about being in an intentional community of the, let's say, about from 1965 through about 1985. And in a very, very distinctive phase of such communities' development. It's not an inevitable phase, but it was common, and when it occurred, it was extremely notorious. Well, my experience and direct understanding of such communities is now reserved for patrons. I'll be putting it up after the first of the month, so you can see why I speak with some authority about this. For disclosure to everybody, all and sundry, no, I was never a member of a cult. I was never a member of an intentional community or commune or something like that. So you can get rid of that particular suspicion. Well, what happens in the game is that we're looking at an intentional community commune at the stage where it separates, or I keep saying stage as if it were like an inevitable progression, but should such a community separate from the larger society economically, effectively, legally, and especially in terms of values, very much in the sense of we are going to raise children here and in this way and not in that way. We are going to interact with our health, with our food, with our social care, our networking this way and not that way. When such a community does that is when larger attention tends to get drawn toward it, and the separation, the sense of otherness, is deliberate, actually, and so has repercussions from the more powerful side. Well, let's take a look at the rules of the game, and we can't because I don't have them. I was a participant, not the organizer of the game, and I flipped through some things, and that was about my extent. I can tell you what it was like from that perspective. First, we built the intentional community in terms of some physical structure and in terms of some ethical or idealistic structure. Physically speaking, now bear in mind this had echoes of near future or just past or something like that. It was now-ish, but didn't have to be this exact now. And so parking garage, a system of rooftops, and a tent city, effectively, makeshift shelters spread across them, and perhaps in the upper floors. So squatters in areas that were not particularly well kept, or perhaps ownership was dodgy, as has been known to be the case with parking garages. And so that's kind of where they were set up. Very vulnerable in many ways, but that's part of what we were asking about. Well, so what were our answers to the basic ideas? And it seemed to focus around something called the Super Duper Med truck, and it's how we take care of our members. And it rapidly kind of evolved in our dialogue to be kind of science fiction-y. Possibly of alien origin, certainly like super beyond any kind of technology that any of us had been familiar with. and so able to work, major medicine and just what seemed to be a never-ending library as long as you just kept delving and kept trying to understand it. And so it's in this truck. Perhaps I always imagined it as kind of a combination of a flatbed truck and a van. It's a pretty extensive vehicle, and so that's kind of our big resource, our big thing that everything focused around, and that led to notions of how we find new members, because the truck is mobile, so you can drive around in it, right? Kind of advertise yourselves as an opportunity or an option to others. And then there's also this notion about how we deal with kids and in the community. And the notion was that in this community, childhood is very binary. You're being taken care of because you're independent. And once you're old enough to do something that needs doing, you do it, and that's it. You don't get any more kid attention or special care. So if you're old enough to do it, you do it. The certain ambiguities about that. The it's in this case concerned tasks, jobs for the community. How that related to sexual maturity was left gray, partly because this is a pretty new community, and frankly, we haven't really grappled with that yet, or perhaps are doing so without realizing it. So there's that. How do we select how do we govern? How do we make do economically? And how do we manage ordinary problems? What's our symbol? How do we, how do we accept new members? What's the process? We have our documentation here for how we do that, and it led to a pretty interesting community, especially in the awareness that consensus really wasn't very functional. The other intentional communities have tried that. They've also tried, the committee decides everything and everybody else just takes it and likes it. And this community, pretty much in awareness of those, says, no, we're doing something else. So we have a something else. What kind of matters, a couple of things that, in answer to those questions, that are relevant to our game especially. One had to do with decision making, which I kind of was interested in this from a social engineering hypothetical point of view, which was that there were people who were recognized as the ones who had expertise in this or that. And they made the decisions. They didn't get together in a group, like a little subgroup of the whole community, and hash out a decision. No, you're just like, okay, Bob does that stuff. Janet does that stuff. And what they say is what they are suggesting that the rest of us do. It was not very enforced. And whether that's functional in the long run is a good question. There's also something that I knew a lot about, which is that groups of this kind, if they are fairly separatist from the larger society, still have a pretty interesting interaction with them, which is that, especially if a lot of marginalized people are members, they've got all kinds of skills, and they'll hit the streets and work their networks and their interactions with people. So somebody might go to the local supermarket and work out a deal with the foreman in the back that, I'll sweep out the back parking lot once a week or twice a week or something. I'll show up and I'll sweep out the back parking lot, I'll do a good job, I'll bust my ass all day, and I get to walk home with all the cans. I get to take home all the cans that are dented, that are supposed to be disposed of, but we'll take them. And so somebody would do something like that. Another person might be doing something a little more straightforwardly dodgy, like just being a dope seller. Doesn't bring it back to the community, doesn't do anything to the community, but gets it and sells it in a very, very casual, like selling joints, loose joints kind of selling, and then takes the cash home. So there's or pays, but goes to the donation store and pays there, and then just comes home with a bunch of new underwear or previously owned close. So anyway, the whole deal is to have, dozens of people who hit the streets every day doing stuff like this, and the community finds itself surprisingly, if a little shabbily equipped, much more so than you might think, particularly if the word goes out, well, look, we need toilet brushes or something like that. So we talked a little bit about how that happened and how that was kind of a major activity that gets overlooked in the purported isolation of these communities. Geez, I spent a lot of time on that. I could go through all of these, but the main one to focus on is that we were already kind of hipped on this truck idea, and somebody said it should be a tire. We should have like a wheel, like a tire symbol for our symbol. That's our, we spray it on walls, or we, silk screen it on t-shirts or stuff like that. So there are a few phrases came up. One was a family of 100, which simply meant that we were no longer distinguishing between family interaction versus societal interaction, that people should care about each other as family if they want to be in a society, and that social mechanisms of fairness should apply within and into and throughout families just like they do in society. So anyway, that's one of the ideals of the group. The biggest thing was basically medical, and saying that working for your paycheck and insurance, and then your paycheck goes to backstop your insurance, which isn't adequate, and you have to pay into, on the ground anyway. So effectively, all you're doing is slaving away just to make sure that you keep your medical opportunities even in existence. It was bogus. It's just flat rejection. Look, it's a scam. Don't do it. Don't try to negotiate it. Don't try to wiggle its terms. Don't try to, change some laws about it or something. No, screw all that. It's a scam. And so we're doing it differently, and we have our truck. So that's a big part of it. So we have these ideas. Now from there, and here's the whole conceit of the game, is that you're making up the argot of the community. Should you know anything about these communities, you will know that they very, very quickly develop their own slang. And it's not just these communities, it's any group, like a summer camp, right? Where the counselors come back year after year, where kids grow up there effectively summer after summer. It'll have its own slang. A school will have its own slang, especially a boarding school, where teachers live on campus and are also dormitory headmasters. So anything like that, which are far more intentional community-like than anybody wants to say, and certainly any kind of corporate life or sports life, people who work together on a team, quickly, the jargon of the activity gets repurposed into daily life in new ways. A particular term comes up from an event. Somebody has an accident, or somebody does something awesome or something like that, and someone says a word, and man, everybody knows that word is now, emotionally loaded with meaning. So this kind of thing has gone on in our community, and we start with a few, and then you keep making them through play, auxiliary terms, and then particular words set the frame for a particular scene of play. So you're, playing, you point to a word that's sitting there on the board. A lot like Spiona and similar games, there is a mess of material on the table that different people can reach out, touch, move, write on. And it's not really representational in physical space, but it's much more about the components of our fiction and how they are continually kind of in touch with human hands. So this is a big feature of this game. And all kinds of things. I mean, you make them up to begin with, and you make them up, as you go. And I've got a bunch of them here. Mostly at first, they were all riffs on the truck. Wheelism, that's a wheel, means, hey, we got it. That happened. We did it. The I'm trucked, which is, all right, all better now. I'm better. I'm trucked. There's, but also the notion of sick and tired. We are sick and tired. And we've sort of adopted this phrase, which sounds feeble and whiny, and said, no, actually, if we live in the larger society, we're sick. It is a sick thing to do. You are functioning as a sick person while you do it, literally, physically, medically. Because you are and might be sick is why you keep working, and so forth. And in this hamster wheel of, your paycheck just gets rolled into the so-called insurance. And the tired is unaware of that this sucks, aware that, that's bogus. So we are the sick and tired, which is now becoming an anthem of, and that's why we're doing this, and now we're trucked. Big difference. So, all right, those are just some of the vocabulary things that arose, and a bunch more. The rules allow for a bunch more to get going. There are phases of play. Each one has its own set of cards. We do have protagonists. Each person is responsible for a character. Ours were... wait, look, are there more like little slang terms lying around here? Yeah, there's a bunch. Okay, cool. Neat things. Just phrases that usually emerge right out of play. One was job. I loved job. Job was just like the dumbest thing a person could do with their time. It's wasted time, wasted effort, completely diluted effort. I do this to, feed my family. Well, no, you don't. It's not feeding your family. And so job is very derisive, and one person even repurposed it in an angry interaction with another character and said job off, right? So that's the kind of thing that evolves in play as you're going on. So who do we had? We had Casey Cordova, who was kind of a squirrely... and you go by your nickname, right? So he's B-Case. Let's see, what other things about it? This was a queer community, effectively. Most of the people there were not gender binary and not normative identification. So I don't know if I don't think that we required that as the community. And one thing we talked about was how a lot of these communities begin with people marginalized for a specific reason. And then after they've created kind of a functional interaction, usually before the big separation, while there's still an activity, like with a storefront or something, then other people who don't fit that marginalized label have heard about the benefits of this activity that they do and have come in. So now by the time you leave and make a big community elsewhere out of this, it's a mix of the people who were kind of in it originally with the marginalized situation, new people with the marginalized situation, often much younger, and the mix of what in at least one historical community were called lifestylers, people who said, oh, that is a rockin' way to leave this shitty society, and I want in. I want to be involved in that, even though they didn't sort of have the, as some would see it, the need or the right. That's an issue in a lot of these things. Okay, so we acknowledge that, there's sort of a mix in the community, but that was sort of its... So we acknowledge that was the kind of running reason for the community all along, but that by this point, there's sort of a mix and match across everybody up there in the tent city. So let's see, there was Casey or B-Case. There was my character, Doc Cross, otherwise Dr. Helena Bishop Colby, and she, as it turned out, was kind of the custodian of the truck. You drew cards to help you kind of come up with this, and you got to toss some and keep some, and each character has aspects of those statements about the community that they are totally behind and aspects that they are doubtful of or dismiss. So I think it's important. No member of the community is assumed to be true blue ideological in every last little purported detail of it. This is one of those things that lead me to think that the authors somehow partake of some authenticity in their understanding of these social phenomena. Who else? Let's see. Grandma, original name Sequoia, kind of an old environmentalist. And then we had Priscilla, birth name Anthony Blackwood, who was very much kind of an old school member of the community back from, he was kind of the middle-aged guy, heavy with, a lot of fairy dust and a lot of gauze and stuff like that. So they also, looking across their values that we, picked from our cards, it was pretty clear which ones were going to find one another compatible and which ones, sort of for the good of the community, didn't really lock horns over stuff, or sort of knew the day might come when they would. Well, anyway, so the first phase of play is mainly just about dealing with the realities of the community we're in and building the subculture. How do we have a party? How do we deal with someone having a shitty day? What are aspects of those basic statements that seem like they are causing more trouble than they solve? Every little card you pull, like, the scene card kind of thing, the bottom red line of the card, which sort of sets up the kind of scene it's going to be, is throwing shade on one or another statement. So it's reflective, one might say. You're building the community more and more details, and the slang is really proliferating. Tricks and tips we came up with, which is sort of the idea that our community has innovative ideas about stuff. And so if you're out there struggling with something, we got some tricks and tips that you never heard of. So things like that. We didn't get through anything but that first phase. And one thing it really, really brought out was the fracture lines in personalities. So Priscilla and Doc Cross actually never had a scene together because the other player and I just didn't really pick each other when the scenes came up, and we knew there was more in play. We didn't talk about it, but my sense was that we were sort of waiting for the day. Maybe there'd be a situation where the two of them were 100% on board with each other, or maybe there would be a scene where it was it. That was it. Their differing points of view were just going to get right out there in the open. And who knew? We weren't waiting for that specific cue, but I had sort of a sense of when I choose you for the other scene person, I'm gonna want to. So, all right. What else? The different phases, as I gather, are not too unpredictable. There is the phase of subversion, whether you can choose different tracks of play, and one of the tracks pretty much focused on physical crackdown on the community, and another one focused hard on the subversion of the community, particularly with agents provocateur and related phenomena, media smears, stuff like that. Then let's see, the beginning, I'm getting out of order here. At the very beginning, there's kind of a choice about what sort of thing. I mean, is this all a bunch of young people who just said, screw the old, we're going to be young, we're going to start over fresh, and we're all going to, you can't start if you're over 19 or something like that. Or in our case, it had a lot more to do with orientation. And then you have other things as well that can kind of kick you off as a linchpin for that identification. And again, fairly approximate identification by the time you get to this point of the community. There is a fairly strong set of prompts. The cards are nicely chosen, and I'd love to play through to get a good look at the cards in the other two decks for the other phases. I believe the third phase is kind of depressing. I could be wrong. Maybe it's joyful or something, but it's basically about the failure of the community and the death of the language. By the middle, I'm pretty sure, given what we saw in the first phase, by the middle, you're going to have a pretty damn rich language for the community. Anyway, so that's kind of where my understanding and interaction with the game stopped. I do think that, as with a number of these games that have a lot of framing content going into scenes, that play itself needs to get pumped with personal energy, wanting to play your character, wanting to say what they say, wanting to get a better idea of the immediacy of the precise location of play. Otherwise, you get into that bullshit. Well, let's see. I want a scene where there's conflict between me and you about this. Okay, well, geez, I want this. Well, I want that. And pretty soon you're having this whole kind of extraordinarily general and completely non-imagined context for an understanding of what's going on. In this game, one or more of us took some effort to do otherwise. One of the first scenes had to do with grandma selling some joints out there on a silly the city street, and how that was going. And we talked about how there was a crappy little park, one of those sort of intersection places in a city where they purportedly build a little park, and it's starving for water, and the trees are all crappy, and there's no grass left. It's just bare dirt, and maybe a rusted piece of an old piece of equipment, playground equipment or something, or a bench or something is sitting there no one ever uses, and it's just the saddest thing ever. And so just by establishing that kind of place for grandma to be sitting out, I mean, it's like the one place in this whole area where there's some dirt at least. And so Sequoia originally, now grandma, is kicking back, at least having some kind of contact with earth, crap as it is, was a real nice context for BKs to come wandering up with some problem that needed some sort of discussion. So I really quite liked it when we had that going. There were a few other places where all of a sudden it wasn't clear whether we were in the park, the street in front of the big parking garage, whether we were up on top, or how many people there while we're talking. Are we surrounded by people at this festival, or are we, off on the edge, or, hanging over, feet over the edge? Anyway, things got real vague over just what was happening while people were focusing on the narrative requirements in a somewhat too abstract way. That really happens in games like this with discussion of the upcoming scene. You can see some thoughts of mine on that regarding Primetime Adventures, text and non-text play, in that sense. But that said, the capacity for this game to deliver extraordinarily vivid play is enormous, given a goodwill toward that imagined, shared, interactive understanding of what our characters are doing, where and how, and with whom around, and what it's like. Given that the terms that get spitballed into existence are extremely vivid and make a lot of sense. Almost said some things the patrons are going to get right there. But anyway, hope that was interesting. I can't say this was a review. I've never read the game all the way through. I haven't played the game all the way through. I got a good look at that first starting table, that first phase of play, and its kind of dynamics. Pressure on the society, on the subculture, isn't really all that. The counterculture, proper term. The pressure on it is minimal during that first phase. I mean, it's real, but it's not in imminent danger or feared as such. The members of the community are pretty spunky about the whole thing still. And so knowing what I know, to play through the whole thing would be probably extremely heartbreaking for me. There are aspects of it that feed into my design for America as well. There's some similarities there that are extremely tragic in the experience that I value quite a bit, and I hope other people share it. So if you say, this is the game about the rise and fall of a language, well, you're right, but it's way more political, way more historical, way much more content about real people, real life, real things than that kind of abstract or puzzle solving or sort of intellectually engaging terminology would suggest.